Disney just delivered another major blow to Marvel, and the timing could not be more controversial. Because while Spider-Man Brand New Day is reportedly crushing expectations at the box office and proving that audiences are still willing to show up for superhero movies, Disney is apparently moving ahead with another major round of layoffs. And this time, Marvel Entertainment is right in the middle of it. That raises a very simple question. If a Spider-Man movie can still generate enormous global interest, why is Disney responding by making Marvel smaller instead of investing more heavily into it? And it gets even more interesting when you look at what Disney CEO Josh D'Amaro is now saying about the future of Marvel, Lucasfilm, Pixar, ESPN, and other divisions. Because according to his argument, these cuts have nothing to do with past failures, but many people are having a very hard time believing that. Before we get into everything, if you're new to the Woke Watch, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because we cover the biggest Hollywood, Disney, Marvel, and entertainment stories as they develop. Now let's get into what is really going on. There has been a lot happening inside the Walt Disney Company lately, but one of the biggest stories involves the company's continued push toward downsizing. And what's making this particularly controversial is the timing. Disney is moving forward with these restructuring efforts at the exact moment when one of Marvel's biggest properties is reportedly performing extremely well. Spider-Man. Brand New Day has reportedly crossed the $1.2 billion mark worldwide, giving Marvel and Sony another major win with the Spider-Man franchise. That success is important for a much bigger reason. For years, Hollywood has been debating whether audiences have simply become tired of superhero movies. But Spider-Man's performance is another argument against that idea. Maybe audiences aren't tired of superheroes. Maybe they're tired of superhero movies that fail to give them a reason to care. That's a very different problem. When a movie like Spider-Man Brand New Day generates enormous attention, it suggests that the superhero genre itself isn't necessarily dead. The audience is still there. The question is whether studios can consistently deliver movies that actually convince people to show up. And Spider-Man appears to have done exactly that, which makes Disney's latest downsizing plans even more difficult for some fans and investors to understand. Because this isn't happening after Marvel completely collapses. It's happening while one of the most recognizable characters in the entire Marvel ecosystem is generating major box office momentum. And apparently, Disney isn't changing course. Josh D'Amaro has now attempted to explain why the company is continuing with these restructuring efforts. His argument is essentially that Disney has to become more streamlined and more efficient if it wants to remain competitive over the long term. According to the position presented in the original comments, downsizing isn't supposed to be viewed as a punishment for Marvel's previous failures. Instead, Disney wants to reduce the size of certain divisions so that the company can redirect resources toward future investments and new intellectual properties. D'Amaro's message is that Disney has to think beyond the immediate success of one movie. Even if Spider-Man Brand New Day performs extremely well, the company still has to consider where Marvel, Disney, and its other divisions are going over the next several years. And that includes looking toward the next decade. From Disney's perspective, simply having one successful movie doesn't eliminate the need to restructure the organization behind it. The company wants smaller and more streamlined divisions involved in film and television production. And apparently, that strategy is expected to continue into 2027. That means Marvel isn't necessarily looking at one isolated round of cuts. There could be additional restructuring ahead. And that's where the situation becomes much more complicated. According to the comments presented in this discussion, the restructuring isn't limited to Marvel Entertainment. Other Disney divisions could also be affected, including Lucasfilm, Pixar, ESPN, and additional parts of the company. That is important because Disney isn't treating this as a Marvel-specific problem. The argument is that the entire company needs to become more efficient. But here's where critics are pushing back. If the company is simultaneously celebrating major successes like Toy Story 5 and Spider-Man Brand New Day, why are those successes not leading to greater investment in the divisions responsible for creating them? That's the question many people are asking, and it's especially relevant when it comes to Marvel, because Marvel isn't just a movie studio. It is one of Disney's most valuable brands. The MCU generates revenue through movies, television, merchandise, licensing, theme parks, consumer products, and countless other areas. So when Disney talks about shrinking Marvel, people naturally want to know exactly what that means for the future. Does it mean fewer employees, fewer projects, smaller production teams, a reduced number of movies and shows, or simply a more efficient corporate structure? Those details matter, because downsizing can sound very different depending on what is actually being cut. There's another major reason why this entire situation is attracting so much attention. The relationship between Disney and Sony when it comes to Spider-Man is complicated. Sony controls the Spider-Man film rights, while Disney and Marvel have their own arrangements involving the character, merchandise, and participation in the larger MCU. So, when Spider-Man Brand New Day performs strongly, the financial benefits aren't necessarily divided in the same way across every category. Sony has a major role when it comes to the Spider-Man movies themselves. Meanwhile, Disney has historically benefited enormously from Spider-Man merchandise and consumer products, and that merchandise business is a massive part of the equation. So from the outside, you can understand why some people would look at a huge Spider-Man success and say, why wouldn't Disney want to expand its Marvel operation? Why would the company be reducing the size of Marvel at the same time that one of its most valuable characters is performing at such a high level? That's the contradiction critics keep pointing toward. But there's another layer to this. Disney isn't only thinking about Brand New Day. Marvel's biggest challenge is figuring out what comes next. The MCU is approaching another major turning point, especially with projects such as Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars sitting at the center of the franchise's future plans. Those movies are expected to be enormous. The real question is what happens after them. What does Marvel look like as it moves closer to the 2030s? Which characters become the new foundation of the MCU? Which franchises remain important? And how does Marvel maintain audience interest without simply repeating the same formula? Those are enormous questions, and according to DeMaro's argument, Disney wants to restructure Marvel now so that the company can be better positioned for that future. In other words, the goal isn't necessarily to abandon Marvel. The goal is supposedly to make Marvel smaller, more efficient, and easier to manage. But critics aren't convinced that shrinking the organization is the best answer. And then there's the obvious comparison. Can Avengers, Doomsday actually outperform Spider-Man, Brand New Day? That's going to be one of the biggest box office debates surrounding Marvel. On paper, Doomsday has everything you would expect from a massive MCU event. It's an Avengers movie, it has enormous brand recognition, it is connected to the larger MCU storyline, and Marvel has every reason to treat it as one of its biggest theatrical events. But Spider-Man is different. Spider-Man has existed as one of the world's most recognizable superheroes for generations. The character has a massive audience that extends far beyond people who regularly follow the MCU. That's why I wouldn't automatically assume that Doomsday will surpass Brand New Day. It absolutely could. But marketing will be critical. The story will matter. The cast will matter. Audience reception will matter. And most importantly, Marvel has to convince people that this is an event they cannot afford to miss. If Doomsday delivers, it could become another enormous win for Marvel. But if it underperforms, then the pressure on Disney's leadership becomes even greater. This brings us back to Josh DeMaro. His argument is essentially that Disney needs to make difficult decisions today in order to invest in tomorrow. That's a reasonable corporate argument on the surface. Companies restructure all the time. Successful companies cut unnecessary costs. They reorganize departments. They move resources toward projects they believe will generate stronger returns. None of that is unusual. The problem is the timing. When you're announcing continued cuts while one of your biggest Marvel properties is reportedly generating enormous box office numbers, people are naturally going to question the strategy. And when you're telling audiences that these cuts have nothing to do with previous failures, that invites even more scrutiny. Because Marvel has obviously experienced both major successes and major disappointments over the past several years. Some projects have exceeded expectations, others have struggled. Some Disney Plus shows have generated enormous attention, while others have faded from the cultural conversation almost immediately. So it's no surprise that investors and fans are linking Disney's restructuring to overall performance. It's not really political, it's just business. What's working, what isn't, and where should Disney invest next? The real question isn't whether Disney can restructure Marvel, it obviously can. The question is whether it's doing it in a way that actually makes the company stronger. There's a big difference between cutting unnecessary bureaucracy and cutting the creative resources needed to make great films and shows. If Disney can build a leaner Marvel that produces fewer but higher quality projects, that could work. Audiences don't need constant releases. They need stories worth caring about. That's why Spider-Man Brand New Day is so important. If it's really performing at the reported level, it proves the audience is still there. Superhero films still have massive potential. The challenge is simple. Better characters, better stories, better execution. So maybe Marvel doesn't need to get bigger. It needs to get smarter. But that doesn't remove concerns about layoffs. Thousands of employees aren't just numbers. They're the people who actually build these worlds. And if more restructuring comes in 2027, the impact could be huge. So here we are. Spider-Man. Brand New Day is reportedly a massive win, crossing $1.2 billion worldwide, with more potential still ahead. Marvel still has Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars coming. Disney still owns some of the biggest entertainment brands in the world. yet the company is still pushing for smaller divisions. That's why this isn't just about layoffs. It's about Disney's vision for the future of entertainment. Does it want fewer, higher impact projects, smaller, cheaper divisions, or is it cutting at the wrong time and risking the creative talent that keeps these franchises alive? Those questions aren't going away anytime soon, and if restructuring continues into 2027, we'll quickly see whether this strategy actually works. As for Avengers, Doomsday, don't assume it automatically beats Spider-Man. It might, but Spider-Man has already proven how powerful the character is when the movie connects with audiences. Maybe the real lesson is this: audiences haven't stopped caring about superheroes, they're just waiting for something worth caring about. Let me know what you think. Is Disney right to downsize Marvel, Lucasfilm, Pixar, and others? Or should it be investing more into the franchises still making huge money? And can Avengers Doomsday beat Spider-Man Brand New Day at the box office? Drop your thoughts below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.